set to South Sudan, which has rejected America's proposal to the UN Security Council to send 4,000 troops to restore calm to the East African nation. Speaking at a news conference in Juba, South Sudanese Minister of Information Makuei said the proposal would turn South Sudan into a protectorate, giving the UN the ability to govern the country. The government is also opposed to putting the proposed regional force under UN mandate. South Sudan's pushback comes as UN officials say the government has begun a crackdown that includes seizing dozens of passports of UN workers and imposing restrictions on travel and delivery of food aid.
If that is not, if our position is not considered, definitely we will not be a party to it. The same thing even with the American zero draft, turning South Sudan into a protectorate. The text is very clear. It is turning South Sudan into a protectorate, and this is a situation that will not accept.
CCTV's Robert Nagila has covered the conflict in South Sudan extensively and joins me now to discuss this issue further. So, Robert, South Sudan here rejecting an additional UN force, and they're arguing that the existing force, UNMISS, has failed to protect civilians. You've been there severally, Robert. What's the picture on the ground? Do civilians have faith in the UN force?
Well, thank you, Penina. It really depends on which side of the political divide you are in. Now, if you're in SPLM, that is President Kiir's ruling party, then most of them do support the ruling party, the SPLM. We saw a couple of weeks ago where supporters of the SPLM movement were out on the streets denouncing this very, very move to bring in foreign forces onto Southern Sudan soil. This because the party led by the president had already rejected that move by the United Nations. Now, after the talks in Ethiopia, they seem to have backed down on that, and it did appear that everything was back on track again. But as of yesterday, confusing messages. Last night, we now understand that it's not going to happen. Supporters on the other side, that's the SPLM in opposition, Dr. Riek Machar's side, they will tell you that that force is absolutely necessary, not just to protect civilians, which is going to be their main mandate, but to provide security for Riek Machar so that he can come back to Juba and continue to carry out his duties as first vice president as well.
But Juba has also expressed a reluctance to have the regional force proposed by IGAD operate under the UN framework. So what's the impact of this? Can the region afford to have a force without the UN framework?
Penina, you just hit the nail on the head. That's the number one point. Can the region afford it? Now, quietly behind the scenes, we know that there are some reservations being expressed by some of the regional countries in terms of cost. Remember that the region is already involved in another conflict in Somalia. The bulk of that is funded by the United Nations, the EU, and the African Union also contributing by virtue of these regional countries. So, and to get in more forces into another country without the source of funds actually sorted out is a big question mark. And many countries, although we had at the IGAD meeting saying that they were ready to send in troops, are expressing reservations quietly because it's not yet known who's going to fund this. Now, if it's the United Nations is going to fund it, then generally you would expect that they would want UNMISS to take the lead role in this particular operation. So this remains to be seen. As yet, the head of this operation from the regional countries has not been announced yet. Some question marks there as well.
And then the US proposal now is suggesting an arms embargo should Juba then reject, should fail to accept this proposal. So what would be the impact of such an arms embargo to the country?
Well, for President Salva Kiir's administration, they see this as putting them in between a rock and a hard place for the simple reason if they're not allowed to get more supplies of arms or to buy weapons, then they see their ability to maintain security within South Sudan very heavily diminished. Now, what we will see, they will then turn on to other parties from the usual ones. They will turn to other parties to try and acquire those weapons and supplies so that they, as far as they're concerned, are able to continue providing and creating stability within the country. So that may not necessarily be a positive move on their part because it will simply mean that South Sudan will turn to other parties and they will be shunned by quite a large number of their international partners and donors, and this will simply carry on to exacerbate the situation on the ground, which is not helping. So some analysts believe that the way forward is for them to reach an agreement fast on this latest peace proposal before they can then start looking at other elements like arms deals, supply of weapons, etc., etc.
All right. Much appreciate those insights, Robert. Thank you very much.